Time now for our regular Monday panel of parliamentary journalists. They are with me now in the studio. Susan Delacourt, a columnist and parliamentary bureau chief for the Toronto Star. Joël-Denis Bellavance is the parliamentary bureau chief for La Presse. And John Ivison is a columnist for the National Post and parliamentary bureau chief for Postmedia. Good to see you all again. Let's talk about the long-awaited report, final report of the Commission of Inquiry on Murdered and Missing Indigenous women and girls. And let's start with what most people are talking about, that is that they've characterized what's happened here as a genocide, but the Prime Minister refused to use the word today in his remarks. What do we make of that?
The difference between being in opposition and being in power. It was interesting the way the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, the original one 4 years ago, I believe it was 4 years ago, not 5, it feels longer. The Prime Minister just said, fine, great, every recommendation. This time you see we embrace them all. This time you see a Prime Minister who is saying, look, this is just the start, we'll consider things, want to be careful. I actually do think a lot of Canadians may appreciate the more careful language. Mm-hmm. This is a huge, huge issue, and you know, I think it was probably impetuous to, 4 years ago say everything I'm accepting, but his caution was the thing I think that struck me today the most.
Yeah, so we heard from one of the commissioners, Kaya Robinson, here earlier on our program, say she does want to hear him say it. She thinks he needs to say it. It's important. If you don't acknowledge what's actually happening, and that's the way they view it, it's hard to see the process moving forward. Yeah,
and the Prime Minister was not alone in not using that word. The Justice Minister refused to use that. Caroline Bennett as well, the Minister responsible for services for Aboriginal people.
Jagmeet Singh used it. He said, I recognize it.
He used it. And probably because the government is cautious, because if they accept that definition of what's happened, it has consequences legally, financially, and probably internationally. Mm-hmm. Canada's reputation would take a hit if if the government was to accept that kind of definition of what's happening. But clearly, other than that, I think the government is ready to move on many of the recommendations. And there's also a separate report dealing with Quebec only. And the government also there wants to move quickly, maybe create special forces for Aboriginal people, police forces, because that's where the lies most.
What do you think, John?
I thought it was a real missed opportunity. I mean, it could have been a healing moment. It turned into a very divisive moment. There's some really wrenching testimony in the report, and if you read, some of these parents who've lost children or people who've lost siblings.
We carried every moment of the hearings here on CPAC. We streamed every minute of it live, and
how could you not be moved?
And we showed some of the testimony tonight in our program, and it's heart wrenching. I think the opinion of Canadians would change a lot if they were able to observe some of it. But having said that, to your point,
right? Well,
there's a missed opportunity on which side here?
Well, there's clearly a problem. The statistics show that Indigenous women were being victimised by violence at triple the rate of non-Indigenous women and double the rate of Indigenous men. I mean, it's a case that if you're Indigenous and a woman, you're a target. Whereas with men, there are various other risk factors, according to the analysts. But here we have now got so the report asked for Canadians to come together as allies to support the measures they were taking, but at the same time as they were asking Canadians to come together with them as allies, they were saying you're complicit in a genocide, and I think that is going to people are going to turn away from that. There have been millions and millions of Canadians, new Canadians in the last decade, who've arrived, who I'm sure do not feel complicit in a genocide. Yeah. Something that's happened hundreds of years before they've arrived.
The other thing I raised with the commissioners, I don't think, and I'm not claiming to be an expert on global genocides or incidents of genocide, but I don't recall where you accuse somebody of being complicit in a genocide and then ask them to help fix it.
Right.
And I think that's to John's point. I mean, for a lot of Canadians, I think they'll go, wait a minute, that's a heavy burden you're asking me to wear, and then you want me to come and help make it right?
Yeah, I want to be really careful about this too, but as a Canadian citizen, rather than taking off my journalist hat, I had the same kind of reaction. It's a loaded word. It does carry, as JD said, international implications. It puts Canada in the category of Rwanda or Bosnia. You know, Canada has recognized officially recognized very few genocides itself. I haven't gone all the way through the recommendations yet, but I was saying earlier today, I wouldn't mind seeing them categorized into what people want the government and authority to do about this problem and what Canadians themselves can do about it. Because I think we're at an interesting time in our history where, you know, not every problem is a state problem. There are societal problems and there are government problems. And it would be, I think just to get our minds around this issue too is, what can society do about this problem? What can an individual Canadian do by way of healing, as John says, and what can the governments do? And I think there are a lot of Canadians out there who will be saying, look, this can't just be something governments do. It's got to be something for society.
And what about Bernard Valcourt? He weighs in and calls it propagandist. The genocide, use of the term genocide is over the top, and then doesn't, after he gets taken up on social media, doubles down on it and doesn't back off. What effect does that have on the conversation?
Well, it sort of poisoned the debate a bit because people are being defensive about it. But Roméo Dallaire, who was a Canadian Armed Forces deployed in Rwanda,
leading the UN mission in Rwanda.
Yeah, he also is not comfortable with the word genocide. So, putting that aside, I think still the Commission's work will be useful for the government. The government will have to take a few months to digest of it all. And I think no political party that aspires to govern this country will be able to ignore some of the key recommendations that I found in that report.
There are some sensible things in there. I mean, my real problem with it was that they adopted the broadest interpretation of their mandate. The mandate was to look at violence with Indigenous women and how do you reduce it. Now, rather than just targeting issues that might reduce the level from 3 times the rate of non-Indigenous women to 2 or 1, or bring it on a par. It's a transformational societal change the report seeks. There are some, I think, specific points that it recommends. Access to advanced investigative units in the north, for example, reducing some sort of prevention techniques and awareness techniques in Indigenous communities, which, let's face it, is where most of the violence happens. I mean, the statistics show that victimization is mostly in the home and spousal, largely.
Okay, let's move on to an issue involving Michael Cooper, the Deputy Justice Critic for the Conservative Party, member of the Justice Committee. Andrew Scheer's kicked him off the Justice Committee, but not out of caucus for taking on a representative from an Alberta Muslim organization who was testifying at a House committee last week about online hate, and he suggested, Mr. Cooper did, that person should be ashamed of raising a link between conservatism and extremism, such as we've seen with the Quebec City mosque shooter and what we saw in Christchurch. Susan, this is a big issue for the Conservatives given the time and place we're at and the narrative they're trying to tell. Is it enough for Andrew Scheer to just say you've lost your committee position?
No. I'll say quite flatly, I think I have when I heard that tape, I was kind of flabbergasted, frankly, and it wasn't just the substance of what he was saying, it was the style in which he was doing it too. It was bullying a witness, and it was the classic bully routine, which is, I'm a victim of what you are accusing me of. Right. And that I found offensive. Even if he hadn't read the Christchurch manifesto.
Well, apparently must have had it in his possession because he read it. Want to read it in the record, and it's been banned.
Yeah, a truly amazing story. And leave aside the cynicism of does it help Andrew Scheer or not? Which I'm sure the calculations were going on behind the scenes. It's just this is no way for a member of Parliament to behave. It's really not to bully a witness, to adopt the language of a terrorist. So no, I think he should be booted from caucus.
John, what do you think?
I can't add much to what you said. I mean, that's pretty much it.
I mean, we typically don't see it. When we've seen it, in my 20 years doing this, once or twice have I seen committee members push the envelope in challenging a witness, and typically it's as happened in this case, other committee members reel them back in and go, wait a minute. What do you think, JD?
That was a major political faux pas on the part of Mr. Cooper, and it came a few days after Mr. Scheer made a speech on immigration, trying to...
I think it was the same day, right?
Yeah, well, yeah.
I think the committee meeting was happening in the morning, and Mr. Scheer was making a speech in the afternoon.
Mr. Scheer was trying to portray his party as open to immigration, open to diversity, tolerant towards the difference of people, and this came on the same day. So
he actually said if you're intolerant, or
there's the door.
Here's the door. Here's the door.
There's the door.
He didn't show quite the door to Mr. Cooper.
He showed him where the door is, though.
Yeah.
But so far he's not been walked out of it.
Yeah,
John, let me switch to the last quick thing here in the time we have left. Jerry Dias and the whole media bailout. Well, I want to be careful. That's the critics call it bailout, but it's a media government funding package of incentives and subsidies to try and help media companies who are in trouble. But it's now descended into controversy over Unifor sitting on the committee who will decide who get the money, and Jerry Dias, the avowed conservative slayer, that it's his union. Should Unifor be on this committee?
No, I mean, I think it's pretty clear they should not. They're obviously a partisan player. They've been unapologetic about being so. And how can you possibly, therefore, decide who's going to get the money and who's not going to get the money? Clearly, the National Post is not getting the money if Jerry's deciding.
JD?
Yeah, it puts the whole process into disrepute, I think.
I think the process is in disrepute to start with.
There's that too.
Yeah, and it makes us uncomfortable. It makes the government uncomfortable, I would say. And I think the easy way out would be to take Mr. Unifor representative out of the picture, so that it does, lower the temperature and all
Susan?
this.
Same thing. I belong to that union. I wish that he was not saying what he was saying.
But his point is he has the right to free speech that he can say, but in this context, it's problematic.
Yeah, it is. And what it spells to me that, the way this debate has gone now, both sides now, the conservatives who are attacking it, are leaving the impression you can't trust the media in the election. This is an old business. We are used to drawing the line between financing business and our jobs. I'm not worried about somebody influencing me with money. I don't worry that car companies buy ads in the newspaper and therefore I can't report on cars.
Right.
But this has made it really, really difficult, and it's unnecessary.
All right, thank you all. Take care.